How to become ethereal, a compositional approach to mass as a timbral dimension. This practice-led research seeks the development of compositional strategies and techniques from the study of the multidimensional condition of timbre. Here I present the compositional approach of the piece A Weightlessness Process or How to Become Ethereal for solo cello, 2019, which is based on the exploration of mass as one of the semantic dimensions of timbre suggested by Zacharakis, Bastiadis, and Rice. Mass has been studied from diverse perspectives. In fact, for Douglas, Noble, and McAdams, the ambiguity around this concept has opened spaces for different compositional practices. Sound mass has been created with many different musical resources, including instrumental, vocal, electroacoustic, and mixed media, and also many different musical techniques, including granular synthesis, tone clusters, music concrete instrumental, spectral fusion, registral extremity, rhythmic complexity, rhythmic ecstasis, micropolyphony, and aleatoric and stochastic procedures. While the idea of sound mass is fairly intuitive, the many connotations of the everyday term mass and the variety of poetic and semantic emphasis of composers and theorists have resulted in a diffuse and polysemic concept in need of clarification. The term's many senses, including formlessness, amorphous mass, materiality, physical mass, spatiality, voluminous mass, solidity, impenetrable mass, numerousness, the masses, enormity, massive, and aggregation, amassed, are not necessarily synonymous, nor is it always clear which connotations authors intend to imply and or exclude, or how those connotations relate to the experience of the listener. Zacharakis, Bastiadis, and Rice propose mass as a timbral semantic dimension according to specific studies of English and Greek words used to describe timbre, as well as the correlations between those words and the acoustic conditions that determine timbral perceptual qualities. Finally, the third dimensions in both groups describe whether a sound is perceived as thick, dense, rich, and full, or light. We suggest mass as an appropriate general semantic label for this dimension. The use of adjectives like thick, dense, rich, and full shows a more spontaneous ability to describe mass in the senses of materiality, spatiality, solidity, enormity, which tend to represent big amounts, while the opposite is scarcely described as light. These descriptors can be associated to a more general understanding of mass as the matter contained in a body. Consequently, this compositional approach presents an exploration of the experience of mass in timbre as the possibility to recognize also its ethereality. In terms of this research, timbre refers to a process of interaction between the parameters of sound, which is perceived as a multidimensional unity, a process that implies continuous transformation. Thus, mass can be understood as a kind of resistance emerged in that interaction, the resistance of the sound parameters to be transformed. In order to understand the complexity of this timbral dimension, I approach three related concepts: weight, density, and volume, which make possible to develop more specific compositional strategies for the description and measurement of mass. The piece A Weightlessness Process, or How to Become Ethereal, presents an exploration of weight, developed as the perception of the force exerted on the parameters of sound through the timbral interaction, the force that determines the kind of resistance generated in the timbral process. Thus, the composition is structured as a weight reduction between two contrasting points, the heaviest and the lightest. Highly influenced by the perceptual experience of dust, the weightlessness process functions by separating the timbral mass in lighter pieces able to drift, like it is described by Joseph Amato in his book. Dust goes where the wind lists, as if it were nothing at all, without mass, without volume, the featherweight of featherweights. It rises up and forms a vapor and haze. Nonetheless, the unstable nature of the timbral experience doesn't allow to create a linear transition to the ethereality. Instead, fluctuations are given over time, sudden interruptions produced by cycles of energy accumulation that tend to reach heavy points of timbre before exploding, leaving a slight reminiscence each time. Richard Serra works on the concept of weight as a synonym of heaviness, which certainly corresponds to only one of its possible measures. Nonetheless, his description of weight as a transformational and dynamic experience, conditions that have been associated to timbre, open many creative perspectives for my compositional approach. Weight is a value for me, not that it is any more compelling than lightness, but I simply know more about weight than about lightness, and therefore I have more to say about it. More to say about the balancing of weight, the diminution of weight, the addition and subtraction of weight, the concentration of weight, the rigging of weight, the propping of weight, the placement of weight, the locking of weight, the psychological effects of weight, the disorientation of weight, the disequilibrium of weight, the rotation of weight, the movement of weight, the directionality of weight, the shape of weight. Following his perspective, the perception of weight in timbre can be approached from the possibility to exert certain forces to construct, control, morph, conduct, move, or even shape the resistance generated in the sound parameters interaction. Similarly, terms like weight and body, even frame, thought as a delimitation of the space occupied by a body, the boundaries of its extensions, can be found in the compositional approach of Rebecca Saunders, Vermilion, 2003, a piece for clarinet, electric guitar, and cello. I have explored this phenomenon of silence often, but never so precisely as in Vermilion. How does silence sound? What are its inner qualities? What are its weight and body? How does it relate to past and future sounds? How does it frame musical gestures? What function does it have between ecstasy and passion? The piece is conceived from the interaction between aggressive gestures and quiet states, but calm is not necessarily reflected on silences, as Saunders explains. So I do explore on another level, I think, not what is the role of silence, but what kind of different silences do we have. Are they moving? Are they active? Are they passive? So it's very important that the silence is just right, and it took me quite a long time to, what I would say, wait in the silence. I think, how pregnant is that silence? How heavy is that silence? If it had to be a dead one, how long should it be? So it is good in it making a clear distinction between what happened before and what is happening afterwards. From the study of Vermilion, it is possible to recognize the perception of weight as a kind of tension, which can be strongly influenced by loudness, but also be constructed by activity in different but related layers. For a deep understanding of the timbral interaction conditions that lead to the perception of weight, I approached the research by Zacharakis, Bastiadis, and Reis. Mass did not correlate significantly with any component in the Greek group. On the contrary, it exhibited two strong correlations in the English group. These correlations suggested that sounds with higher fundamental frequency were perceived as lighter, and also that auditory thickness and density increased with the inharmonicity and with fluctuations of the spectral centroid. Besides the impact of pitch register on the perception of weight, it is necessary to study the impact that inharmonicity and fluctuation of the spectral centroid can also have on it, even though thickness and density are not directly approached in this piece. In this research, weight is understood as the force exerted to determine the resistance emerged in timbre, which is perceived in the internal interaction as well as the experience of the physical approach to the sound sources. Methodology. A classification of cello techniques allowed me to explore different experiences of weight according to the parameters and conditions determined for 3 stages: heaviness, reduction process, ethereality. This classification doesn't have an association to specific descriptors because the use of words to correspond measures of force seem to be imprecise. Consequently, the only semantic approach to weight are the extreme points of the process, heaviness and ethereality, which allow me to explore with more flexibility the association between physical and aural experience in the timbral perception of weight. First, I worked on the perception of heaviness from the exploration of magnetic videotapes noted to the lowest strings. The friction produced by the fingers sliding across the tape allowed to explore the concept of resistance from the physical experience. Timbre presents different behavior according to the finger pressure and the speed of the slide, which is intended to be controlled by the performer through the dynamics notated on score. Although the main intention is to keep a steady pace, the nature of the friction makes the movement unpredictable. A preliminary version of the piece was performed by Sévère Ballon during a 2-session workshop at the University of Leeds in November 2019. The recordings were spectrally analyzed using the software Sonic Visualizer to recognize specific timbral conditions in the study of weight. In general, it is possible to say that the finger slide on magnetic tape produces a timbre with a very rich spectrum. The complexity of this timbre presents different characteristics. For example, there is high loudness across the spectrum, represented in colors orange and red in the spectrogram. Likewise, the fluctuation of the spectral centroid top image shows how unstable this timbre is. The following graph shows how the reduction of weight in the piece is explored through the spectral complexity of techniques like multiphonics and simultaneous quarter of tones. The harmonic dissonance produced by proximity of pitches acts as a force of repulsion, the constant beating of adjacent partials fighting for a place to consolidate in the spectrum field, which contributes to the perception of different levels of weightiness in timbre. These techniques create timbres that conserve qualities as high inharmonicity and fluctuations of the spectral centroid. However, the analysis also shows that the levels of loudness are lower. According to the spectral centroid analysis, the multiphonic presents higher fluctuations, especially with change of bow pressure, while the quarter of tone superposition tends to be more stable. Finally, the point in which timbre manifests its lightest state is reached through the exploration of the highest harmonic possible on strings 1 and 2, normal bowing and the softest dynamics. The intended statism contrasts with the unpredictable behavior of the previous techniques in order to create the experience of ethereality. The levels of loudness are lower than the previous excerpts. Nonetheless, Harmonics presents some instability as it is indicated by the level of spectral centroid fluctuations. Discussion. From the compositional perspective, the weight of timbre can be approached as the force exerted on the timbral interaction in which the sound parameters are mutually transformed. This force can be experienced from the physical approach to the sound sources as well as the internal behavior of timbre. Consequently, it can be said that a stronger force leads to the perception of a major resistance, which increases weight of timbre, while less force generates a minor resistance, making timbre lighter. The spectral analysis of the cello techniques developed for this piece allows to recognize that the levels of loudness, pitch register, inharmonicity, and fluctuation of the spectral centroid influence the perception of weight in timbre. Techniques like multiphonics, which generally present low levels of loudness, create a timbre that is perceived as less light than the one created by the highest harmonics possible on strings 1 and 2, in which there is less inharmonicity. Therefore, the ethereality of timbre coincides with all conditions: low level of loudness, low level of inharmonicity, and high pitch register. The influence of the fluctuations of the spectral centroid seems to be minor, as it can be recognized in the simultaneity of quarter of tones, which presents a more stable spectral centroid. However, this technique is not perceived as the lightest point of the piece due to the low register of the most prominent fundamental. On the other hand, the finger slide on a magnetic tape presents all the conditions associated to the perception of heaviness: high level of loudness, high level of fluctuations of the spectral centroid, high inharmonicity, and low register pitch.